This is the Ballpark Digest podcast. I'm Jesse Goldberg Strassler, rejoined once again by Kevin Reichard, the publisher, editor, everything of Ballpark Digest, as we are about to name our Major League Baseball Broadcaster of the Year 2021. And as a voice broadcaster for a team that's close to my heart, Kevin, would you do the honors?
Yeah, I'm really proud to announce that that Melanie Newman is our Broadcaster of the Year in Major League Baseball. And for those of us who have been watching Melanie's career over the years, this award should be no surprise to anyone. She is I just love to listen to your broadcast, Melanie. So that's part of the reason why we went with the award. But also, we recognize your talent, and I think it's still sort of fair to call you an up and comer in the world of broadcasting. So this is sort of an easy decision this year, to be quite honest. So welcome and thank you for joining us.
No, thank you guys so much. This just absolutely blows me away. And I think if you called me anything but an up and comer, it would be a gross overstep because I still feel very, very new to everything.
One of the things we try to do with these awards is not, is to recognize accomplishments, but also recognize people who will make a difference in the future as well. And I got to say, when I look back at our broadcasters, it's a pretty distinguished group. Most of the former minor league announcers are now major league announcers, including a few who have transitioned to other sports, which I find interestingly enough. Before we get too far, why don't you give us the brief overview of the career so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can take it all the way back to the fact that I never thought I'd be a broadcaster. Morbidly shy, I pursued print journalism. And when I attended Troy University, they switched me over to, it's two separate majors between print and broadcast. And they said, well, we think you're better off here. And so I trusted that, got involved in a lot of our Division I sports, whether that was play calling or putting together packages and tapes for our news station. And walked out into the wide world after that with no sense of direction on how to pursue live sports broadcasting. No one really gives you the book for that outside of a news station. And I knew I didn't want to do that. Got really lucky because I ended up with an independent team about a year after I graduated, quit in the middle of the night, in the middle of the season. It was not a suitable working environment by any means. And I called everybody and I just said, look, even if it's flipping hot dogs, if you have a place for me to finish this season, I'll go. And a good friend of mine, Justin Baker, said, look, we just fired our on-field host and we'd love to have you in Mobile with the Bay Bears. And so I packed up everything in Kilgore, Texas, and drove home for about a week and then went south to Mobile and ended up spending a good season and a half with them. And I owe him a lot. He was the one who said, you're going to be more than a host. He put me in the booth. He fought for me to stay in the booth. I paid out of pocket to travel on the road with the team and to be able to learn more of the broadcasting ropes that way. From there, I started bouncing around, picking up different gigs with ESPN3, the ACC network, several other smaller college conferences. I was introduced to the Arizona Fall League. Fell in love with that. And between doing work corresponding for the Diamondbacks prospects who were out there, that grew into being a fall league actual media coordinator for them. Got really fortunate again, landed in 2018 with the Frisco RoughRiders as their number 2. And they also gave me a chance for their Fox broadcasts to be their sideline reporter on those select games. And then I thought I'd be back in Frisco, and found out about 2 weeks into spring training that was not the case due to budget cuts. But there had been some more moves shifting around, and last minute, the Salem Red Sox had an opening, and I all but beat down the door through my phone to let them know that I would be there. I would do whatever it took to have that job and to contribute to them. And it was such a serendipitous fit. That was really the first organization that I felt not only did I belong in, but I was treated as an actual equal, not with kid gloves, not put on a pedestal. And their general manager, Alan Lawrence, told me I had a job there as long as I wanted. And I had actually settled into this idea that I get it. I get how people are minor league lifers. And I think I would be really happy making a life in the Roanoke Valley. And that's when Baltimore called. because that's how it always works, right? You make plans and they change. And what I thought was just an informational phone call, they knew that I was geographically close. I could fill in a game or two if needed. I was very surprised to receive an email back that it was actually, in fact, a full-time offer and a chance to actually make it to the big leagues. And the rest just writes itself from there. You know, we got to do ESPN games this year, the YouTube and the MLB Network showcase games. And I thought 2020 had been the big year because that was my debut. And I had no idea that 2021 could even one up that. And it still has.
2020, though, was a pandemic year in terms of there was no minor league baseball and Major League Baseball. It was a very unusual experience for broadcasters. All of these broadcasters who'd been in Major League Baseball for seasons upon seasons are having to change and adjust. For you, welcome to the show. What was that experience like?
It was. So the initial shutdown, I think everybody else was panicking. And like you said, you get used to so much going wrong in the minors that you get to a point of being comfortable with what you can't control. And you're like, it's out of my hands. It is what it is. So everybody else is going, oh, we got to go home. I don't know what we're going to do. Are we going to come back? And I was like, I'm going to take a nap. I'm looking forward to taking a nap. Because at that point, I was still working full time as well for the front office because I didn't know I was going to have this big league job. So I was literally splitting my days at spring training between getting up super early in the morning, trying to go to camp, trying to learn the Orioles, and then going and working games on the stat side of things for Major League Baseball, and then circling back if I wasn't scheduled for an Orioles game and trying to figure out what they had done, or if they had a night game, going to the night game. And so I kind of took that in stride. It was a chance, as you know, we don't get a lot of work-life balance, and I got a little bit of that back because there was no baseball. We had nothing but a chance to give back to our families at that point and just hang out with them while we waited in this unknown. But after that, after things got back in session, I wouldn't lie. It's been difficult. It's really hard, especially given that my whole platform and what drives me in this industry is bringing the human element of players, and you can't get that without communication and connection. So I'm brand new. I'm a stranger, and I've never met these guys, and I'm trying to find out things about them on Google, and like if they post something interesting on Instagram, like DMing them about it and hoping that they trust me enough through a DM to further explain, what they're talking about and certain things. And I've been lucky. We have a really gracious group of guys, and I think they get it as well. And they understand too, my overall angle with what I'm trying to do here. But it has been certainly a challenging situation to go from being such an intimate part of a team in the minor leagues to pandemic era Major League Baseball, which is like, you're like Rapunzel. I mean, you're up in the tower calling these games, and there are just these little ants on the field, and you might see them across the parking lot through a fence, but we're making it work. And I really hope that 22 brings more change.
Your time in the Arizona Fall League. The Arizona Fall League is for prospects. It's for all of those future baseball stars, as it turned out, for future broadcast stars as well. Were there players that you worked with, that you met in the AFL, that now years later you got to catch up with and say, I made the majors too?
Yeah, it's so funny because there were even players, obviously back then, I didn't realize I was working with, like Tanner Scott and DJ Stewart. And I think DJ remembered me a little bit because we had been around each other, but I didn't get to see the relievers that often until I was going back and looking at the alumni list. And just understanding, how many I had actually been around for the 3-4 years that I was out there in the Fall League. And I can't stress enough to people how underrated the Fall League is, especially from a fan's perspective, and how intimate that setting is to get to know guys who really are that one step away. But they've been my favorite reaction to me making it to the big leagues is the guys that have reached out, and they're like, look at us, like we are doing this now, because they get it. They've seen that, I did walk the same trail as them. I didn't get to just wake up and roll out into a big league job. And I know guys like Daniel Robertson, and he's bounced around a little bit, but getting to tell his story about losing his dad, that was back in 2015. And he was still so excited and reached out right away. I know Nick Heath, who's been popping around a little bit this year too. He might be one of the best hype men alive. Guys like that, it's so wonderful to come back and connect with them And whether that was in the fall league or, crossing paths in the minor leagues as well. They're the best big family you could ever ask for. And I never thought that I'd be able to relate to an athlete because I'm certainly not anywhere close to one. But it's really the coolest sensation.
I want to go back to Salem because you talked about how in Salem you were treated with respect. In Salem, you were part of a broadcast media relations department with Suzie Cool. How was that working with her on the broadcasts and in media?
Yeah, so it was awesome because going through that interview, it was the first time I had never been asked, and this is adding, a dozen major league interviews and then hundreds of minor league interviews that I had done trying to get a job. But it was the first time I hadn't gotten well, you're a female, so how would you handle, being on the bus, being in the clubhouse, fill in the blank at that point. And that's when I started to understand that they really got it, that they were interviewing me strictly based on what I brought to the table, not what I looked like. Um, so getting to meet Suzie and have another female in the office, it was awesome because I had come from Frisco, and I think they're an exception because their front office is right around like 65, 70 people. And we know that's not the norm. Um, but our creative department in Frisco had several women in it. And so that was a new experience for me, getting to have actual female camaraderie in a minor league workplace. And then seeing that she was in Salem and she had an assistant, Rebecca, as well, who was just phenomenal. It was really cool. We had a little more separation, I think, than what people realized. She was really full time with marketing and the ballpark promotions and the on field hosting and making sure people got out there. But at the end of the day, the couple times that she got to come in the booth, she came on, I think, 2 road trips with us, just having another female companion there to hang out with and having somebody to socialize with at all, because I'm used to being very much a lone wolf. Even though, the guys are great, there's still a lot of those times where you're separated. It was a very fortunate experience. And I'm hoping too, when you look ahead, that that's something we can feel a little more of, because I also think fans don't understand that is, we sit alone in a booth. And then for some of the male broadcasters, they might go and, hang out at like the hotel lobby or the pool or the bar with some of the guys after the game. And we don't really have that. There still is a level of separation because, you're trying to teach these young guys those lines of boundaries and respect and professionalism. But it's been encouraging looking forward to see who's making moves. And I know too, with Emily Messina and Jill Guerin, they're both calling fall league games right now.
Yeah.
And to see them make those announcements on Twitter, it made my heart soar.
When you were first hired by the Baltimore Orioles, it was part of, I remember the roster that was sent out. You and Jeff Arnold and a host of former Orioles and Baltimore personalities. How did you build chemistry with a number of different broadcast colleagues and partners?
There were 21 of us in 2020. I think we had more than the team. We were pretty close. This year it was cut down to 8, but getting to work with the former players was really, I think, the coolest experience in the world for me, because we had guys like Mike Bordick in particular. He was my pre and post game host for Masson. Especially when the team was on the road, we were held in a little studio that's just off of the press row. And so if they were home, like we had a look right out over the field, but if not, they wheeled in these giant TVs for us. And Mike talked the game, and it wasn't in a condescending or a parenting way about it. It was just like 2 buddies, we could have kicked back and had beers at that point, and just shot the game and talked about stuff. But he would have such insight and just saying things naturally. That was a really cool learning moment for me to be like, okay, so that's what he sees. This is how he's analyzing this particular play or what he's anticipating. And so we'd host pregame, and then we'd sit back and we'd open up the dinners we had brought from home and just watch and talk. And then we'd get back on air after. And I think that's one of the most cherished moments for me, especially after they cut down the staff this year, that I've really, really missed. He was one of the absolute best. And then you've got, Ben McDonald is who he is. And I think everybody knows his personality is right there on his camouflage sleeve. He is somebody, though, that I wouldn't say stalked, but I definitely was one of those young aspiring journalists. I wasn't afraid to reach out to him and say, hey, like, we're at the College World Series and I know you're here. And credit to Ben, because now that I know him on a really personal level, he really does interact and respond to all the young journalists that are coming up. He does everything he can to connect them with, like-minded people or people who can help them out. And is just down to earth. And then you've got Jim Palmer on the other end of things, and he has no filter. I've found that working in this industry, it can be a little difficult to get males to be honest when you ask for feedback. I think they're still a little afraid that you may retaliate as a female and, oh, well, they're being critical or they're being sexist. And it's not the case, at least for me. I need genuine feedback so that I can get better. And with Cakes, you don't ever have to ask him. We had this weird habit. We would end up getting to the ballpark at the exact same time this season. And so we'd both get out of our cars and he'd look across the parking lot at me, and he would just start going into it. He's like, "Hey, about last night." And I'm like, "All right, like lay it on me. Let's go." And I adore it so much. He's got such a dry, sarcastic sense of humor, but he knows everything. His detail of the game, he could tell you his exact pitch sequencing from 1972 and who was sitting in the second row behind this batter. And it's just been incredible to listen to. And for the rest of our guys too, I mean, you mentioned Jeff Arnold. That one was fortunate in itself just because he and I were in the Carolina League together. He was in Frederick when I was in Salem, and having somebody else that I got to come up with was really lucky. You kind of feel like you have that companion that you're growing with. And I've joked with him from the start when I got the Salem job. Mike Farron, who was with the Diamondbacks, he called Jeff, and I adore Mike. And he said, "Look, a girl got this job. There's going to be a lot of, hoopla because she's a girl, but like, she's a good one, give her a chance." And so I joke that from that point, he was legally obligated to stick with me. Like, he wasn't allowed to not be my friend. And now he's really, really stuck with me because, we made the jump at the same time. But they're such a great group of guys. And you really do feel like everybody has each other's back there. And I feel like the Orioles did a good enough job too of hiring such a different set of people that everybody brings something a little different than the next to the table.
Well, let's talk about what you bring to the table, because we began this, Kevin, with you saying how much you enjoy Melanie's broadcasts. Melanie, how have you found your voice?
It is a continuing process, first of all, and it still comes down to feeling comfortable with how my own voice sounds. We get a lot of feedback as women that men don't necessarily get, of constantly monitoring that we're not getting too pitchy, too high. We have to stay low and loud, as we call it, if there's an exciting play. And it's not natural to have to speak in not your voice for 4 hours. And I'm not saying we put on this, theater-esque sound, but it's just different. So it starts with that, and that's usually something that I've been paying attention to, on a day in, day out basis of how was I able to handle certain situations. But finding how I wanted to bring the game to people has really started from college and moved from there. And I credit Rachel Barbeau. She was a reporter for ESPN. Her main realm was in football, but she left to start I'm Changing the Narrative, which was all about the humanization of athletes and making them know that they are a value as a human being first, and that the athletic stuff is just kind of a side factor to that. And she really gave me that charge. This was 5 years ago now, that I could start putting more of that into the broadcast than I originally had. I had it separate for so long. Of my sideline work is my sideline work, and what I do in the booth is, it's the X's and O's, and that's it. It needs to be black and white. And realizing that I could start to bring in those sideline pieces and what spoke to me and what really humanized the game to me, and that was okay. I didn't have to stick to this national script of this is how everybody calls the game, and that's the only way you're going to climb up the ladders if you call it just like everybody else calls it. And I think too, seeing that was a step back, that I wasn't trying to be like Vin Scully, but they are the Scully-esque qualities of being able to take a dead space in a game, especially if you have a pitcher or batter who takes the world to reset between every pitch. And having that opportunity to just throw a little anecdote in there, but being careful with how you do it, and the way that you convey it. And some are best for that day. Some are best that you have them and you sit on them until a particular time of the season, or, they're at a certain venue that might be a little more relevant and make it a little more special. But I think bringing that in is really when I started to fall in love with it, because for the longest time I thought, oh, I'm not a play-by-play person. Like, that's not my strength. That's not what I ultimately want to do in the long run. But understanding how fluid our industry is, and that we really do have more creative freedoms than we think, that was a huge step forward for me to really falling in love with this half of it.
Did you have a favorite story or two to tell? A story that maybe you found via an unusual way, perhaps however you stumbled over it, that you really enjoyed being able to relate to your audience on the air?
Oh gosh. There's really so many. And I go back to the Daniel Robertson story with him losing his dad. But that one, ironically, I didn't get to tell on air at that point, because I was just gathering stories in general, whether that was writing them up or releasing them with like a YouTube audio clip, because of course we didn't have all of the platforms that we have now back then to tell these. But really this year, just getting to know, I think, John Means' family, and the stories that his wife Caroline has been so forthcoming about, and they're just their honesty and their reality that this is a young guy who all of a sudden was labeled as the ace of the team. But everybody wanted to point at, well, his numbers fell apart last year, and it was this and that, and getting to know Caroline, they dealt with a miscarriage with their first pregnancy. He lost his dad, who was the driving force of why he was in the game. And you see those pieces and you think, yeah, it's his job to be a baseball player. And it's anybody's job to continue on, even though they're dealing with something personally. But you can't tell me that as a human being, with those two big things in 1 year, and then Caroline getting pregnant again with McCoy, that's not going to have a little bit of an effect. That's not going to live in your head a little bit when you're trying to go on the mound and your dad is supposed to be there and he's not there anymore. So I think bringing that home to people and reminding them, hey, this is a human being dealing with exceptional loss this year, dealing with a lot of stuff. Oh, on top of the fact, as you mentioned, it's a pandemic year, so the restrictions to even seeing the rest of your family, is crazy. That one will always be very special to me, just because, again, they don't have to trust me with any of this. They don't have to tell me anything. They could say, oh, she's going to botch the way they deliver it, or she's going to use it for an ulterior motive. And just having that real sense of honesty and rawness to step forward and talk about it. And on a lighter note, we had Connor Green this year, one of our relievers, and everybody loves talking, oh, he's friends with Charlie Sheen, and he's done this. He's another one of my fall leaguers that very much remembered me when he was with Toronto. But he had gone, and I had to tell people this when he came back up. I said, look, in 30 days, he's gone from Norfolk to Baltimore to Tampa Bay, I think. Don't quote me on that. Back to the Dodgers, to AAA Oklahoma City, back to LA, and then back to the Orioles, and then back to Norfolk, and then back to Baltimore, like in 30 days. And, you just laugh about these moments, because you know that fans don't see that underside of it. They're not going to pull up a guy's transaction page and be like, oh, this is all he's been doing. We haven't heard from him in 3 weeks. I don't think some of them even realized he changed teams. They just probably figured, oh, he got sent down, he's being brought back up again. But it's all of the big and little things that kind of swirl together to make these people, that to me at the end of the day is always going to be the most important to bring home, because no one knows what it's like to have a 2 ERA or to make $3 million. Everybody's like, that's nice, that must be nice. But they get what it's like when you've got a sick kid at home, or like you just got a new puppy and he chewed up everything, and you're trying to get to work, which for them is the ballpark. And so that's why I think it matters, because that's where people form emotional attachments and they keep coming back, is the guy that they really feel like either they can relate to or that has a really big rooting cause.
I think that answer might connect to your next answer. Kevin and I have been talking a lot about where we've been, where we are, where we're going, and specifically in broadcasting, where do you think it's going?
With broadcasting as a whole?
Yes, and for your role, like the role of the broadcaster, but we've been talking about whether it's technology or platforms or how things have shifted, how things will stay the same. So it's whatever you need to incorporate. So it's very much the human interest story cannot go anywhere, needs to be a part, and should be a larger part, arguably, than it's ever been before as you tell these players' stories. But it's true that your job in calling the game is going to be different than, let's say, Chuck Thompson's job from decades ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important too, and as much as I sometimes curse the existence of social media, I think having it, even as a broadcaster, it does matter because the fans now want to be fully connected to every single aspect of it. And sometimes it means you're kind of thrown out in the air a little bit. You get the criticisms that you didn't necessarily ask for, but that's where the delete and mute and all of those fun buttons come into play. But I just think there's such an open span. I will add to that though. I know that we fell victim to it in Mobile, and that was all the way back in 2014. I think still having radio broadcasts matter. I think especially on the major league end, if you go fully digital streaming, you do lose a lot of your audience. It surprises me to this day how many people say, "Oh, I had you on in the car, I turned on my little radio while I was mowing the lawn." And it does make me think of my dad because he lives by his Walkman radio headset unit, and it's the greatest thing ever. But I think radio still matters as much as people want to label it this dinosaur and it's dying, and they're like, "Oh, well, we've got satellite radio and we've got this." It's still viable. It's the same as a newspaper. People still read newspapers. I mean, living here in Atlanta in the off season, let me tell you how impossible it was to find the Sunday AJC after the Braves won. You can't. They've done 3 re-releases of it, and the last time we tried to get the edition, we walked into our grocery store and the line went out the door waiting to get the paper. So it still matters to keep those old school roles alive. But no, you're right. I think more than anything, we really got into putting all athletes on a pedestal in the mid late 90s, early 2000s. It was that flashy era, these guys who couldn't be touched. And we're realizing that that created a little bit of that animosity with the fans. Why should they pay these elevated tickets for these guys who already make millions? And getting back to the home roots of hey, let's tell stories. Let's bring this game to life. It's not just about the money and the numbers anymore. Let's really get past this here. That's where we're starting to make a turn. And I just hope that trend continues to grow. I know all of the advanced analytics and the sabermetrics are growing as well, but I think you can marry the two. I don't think that, it's such a small broadcast that you can only do one or the other. You can absolutely have both in there. And we've even seen the alternate broadcasts now that Jason Benetti just absolutely kills. And I think that's a great platform as well, for the people who really do just want to breathe in those numbers 24/7. Now on the television side of things, it's hard to say where that goes because we all know that there's shifting tectonic plates underneath us with the regional networks and all of the relationships that tie up. And I don't want to know any of it. I'm very happy sitting on the surface. But I just think, especially now that they have also found that they can have digital platforms and, you can take them with you on your phone and still watch. It just continues to show that we can adapt and survive. But more than anything, we have to have access. We have to have travel. We have to have that full gamut of broadcast access again, because if not, and you're giving all of these avenues of access and you're giving fans all these other ways to connect, especially now they can connect to the players on their own social media. If we can't take that a step forward and give them something they can't already get themselves, that would be where we would start to lose.
On television, how was your experience calling Dodgers Padres with Jess Mendoza?
It was unexpected. And I say that because you understand everybody does things differently, and that's fine. I had no idea what to expect because I had never done anything for the ESPN before. I'd been on the 3 and the plus, and axe throwing is usually where people recognize me from ESPN. Was, oh, you're in Halifax. And um, so I flew to Charlotte and went to their regional. ESPN has a regional there, and it's usually where they do all of their ACC and SEC network stuff. But they had me in a little office cubicle. It had glass on 2 sides, so I could see out into the office bullpen. And it was a home setup. It was a self-operated camera and light with the pop-up backdrop behind me. And Jess was at home, I believe in Oregon. And so between, like, you try to figure out the nuances of the timing delays, and so you don't want to talk over each other. And this is also somebody who I've never worked, I've met her before, but I had never worked with her, and that's very different, as trying to find chemistry. And the biggest thing for me as a play-by-play person is I know I'm a traffic director. So if I can do something that sets up my analyst, and every analyst wants to bring something different, finding out what it is that they want to do, that's what matters to me. So even asking her before the game, it's, how can I make you your best? How can I make you your most successful? And just understanding where she might naturally want to jump in. Where she might have something else that I could kind of poke her on a little bit and see what was going on. And by the way, too, it was her idea to bring in Billie Jean King, which I just thought was the coolest because, she's been all over all of these moves on social media and congratulating on Twitter and Instagram. And but to actually have a conversation with her and to just hear, how into the game she was. She was all over Chris Taylor and Max Scherzer, and she knew everything that was going on, and she was so fiery about it. That was a really cool moment, and that was really due to Jess being like, hey, have you guys thought about bringing her on? She's a Dodgers owner. It's a very relevant situation. Like, let's make this happen. But she was wonderful. It's tough because it's adjusting to the fact that it's California baseball, and it's 2 a.m. Back in Charlotte, and everybody else has gone home. I've watched the lights turn off in the bullpens one by one while we're calling this game. But they were a fun crew, and they made a very unorthodox situation work pretty smoothly.
Kevin, I apologize for monopolizing so many questions.
No, this is fascinating. And you were so right to be asking all these questions because you're the pro. You two are the pros, as you could tell by listening to me in this podcast. I'm not a broadcast pro, so I thank you for your patience. One thing I was thinking about reflecting on it is, I know it's really difficult to call a game from afar. Are you hoping that ends this season at least? Or are we going to be stuck with a situation like you and Jess just had with remote calls and not seeing each other, not being in the ballpark? And I know the broadcasters, on every level, absolutely hate it.
It has to change. It's pretty point blank forward. I was encouraged to see the NBA more or less telling their regionals that they have to travel, they have to get back to it. And as much as too, everybody keeps asking me, oh, what's your favorite part of the job so far? What are you excited the most about? And I'm like, I haven't gotten to even partake in half of what you look forward to about getting to the big leagues, which is, the travel and seeing all these different stadiums. It's impossible. We make it work the best we can, but we miss plays because, the cameras aren't on them, or the play happens out of the camera's angle, or somebody doesn't get to it quickly enough, or, if we're at the hands of another network, they haven't come back from commercial in time. We've had nights, because we did all of ours, I know everybody was different, but we called all of our games from Camden Yards. So we'd go there when the team was on the road and sit in an empty ballpark. And we had moments where we lost all of our feeds. Our monitors went black, and we had nothing. And especially on radio, what are we supposed to tell people? And we know that everybody else at home can still, if it's radio, they can still hear it. And if it's TV, they can still see it. But we're sitting there and we have no way at all to guide anybody on what's going on in the game. And you just feel so helpless. in that situation. And you can't read how the park is playing. We've had games where we thought it was going to be a fly ball out and it's a home run, or especially if it's a place like Boston and it's squeaking out by Pesky's pole. You can't always see it, and so you're kind of stuck there wondering with the rest of the fans, and it just shoots the quality. It really does. So I think at some point the conversation has to be had, just how important this is. And I know too, we saw a couple this year between Hazel May and Marakovitz with the Yankees. They both took it on their own to travel separately. I think they both drove down to Baltimore so that they could cover the games themselves. But the longer that we hold this out, the small amount of money that's being saved not traveling broadcasting is just killing the overall impact, especially for fans.
Well, that's my fear, is that they're hiding behind COVID protocols in order to save a few bucks here and there. And, at some point, Sinclair's got to be kicked alongside the head and say, you got to send people on the road, root the same way. And it's just a terrible experience for fans, and you tend to sort of tune it out when you don't get that. Fans can tell, despite what some executives might think.
Exactly. And I think the perfect example really was the all-female game this year for Major League Baseball, when it was myself, Heidi, Watney, Lauren Gardner, Alanna Rizzo, why am I blanking on her name? Sarah Langs. My goodness, my favorite statistician alive. But it was the Orioles Rays, and it was game 2 of that series. And what could have been versus what was, it does play in my head a lot. So I called game 1 from Camden Yards. The team was on the road in Tampa, and I finished at 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. I drove overnight to New Jersey to the network studios to call game 2. That was another 7 o'clock game. So we wrapped up. We had our post-wrap meeting, and I drove overnight again because game 3 was at noon. And I would still love to thank whoever scheduled a random midweek noon game, but it's fine. So I got home at 5:30 in the morning, and then we had to join remotely to Good Morning America at 6:30. And so I slept for 45 minutes. And because it was a noon game, as soon as I finished up with that interview, I had to drive back to Camden Yards to call game 3. So, I've now called 3 games, and I've run on maybe 5 hours of sleep in 3 days. And it just killed me. But that was, it was all remote. They were going to try to have us live in person for that game, but couldn't guarantee my travel back to Baltimore to call game 3 remotely in time before the noon first pitch. And so it's stuff that I think in our wildest dreams, if you had told us even 3 years ago that would happen, you would, tell them to buzz off, or that, they're on something at that point, because there was just no way.
I mean, that's just the logistics are going to lead to you and everybody else getting sick, because the body's got no time to recover, let alone, there you go, let alone a broadcaster has to prepare, right? A broadcaster has to take care of their voice so that the voice at the highest level, like, you don't want a pitcher going out there having thrown however many pitches, however many days in a row, but you need time to prepare for each broadcast. So it puts a broadcaster in a poor position. And while we're on this note, like, what other soapboxes, that's probably not the best way to put it, but now that you have the perspective, now that you've gone through 2 seasons and you've been through minor league baseball, you're like, this is something that needs to change. This is something that needs to be addressed.
It really comes down to access. And I wish I had more to say, but that's just been the biggest glaring issue really to deal with. And I mean, again, too, I know we're lucky. I came from a situation where I was on the bus with these guys. They got very used to, seeing me after games, sitting in the hallway outside of my room, trying to write the game recap and trying to get stuff done. I was always at batting practice, always getting content from them. We always sat down and did pregame interviews. And I have had none of it. We've had a couple, interviews that have been done over the phone with a few guys, maybe 3 or 4. And a lot of me being very awkward, reaching out on social media and just saying, hey, look, I'm trying to make sure that I'm telling these stories right. And I know you don't know me. Hi, nice to meet you. But that is such, the core of how we do our entire job, that I cannot stress enough that we have to have back at some point, is the access. And that comes down to both, being able to talk to the players, but also the travel, and being able to be there at the ballpark and see the game in front of our eyes for ourselves. Once we get past that, maybe I'll have a little more of an interesting answer on how we can grow this and make this better. But for now, we're kind of still sitting at square one.
Yeah, I think that's another. I think the whole access issue is a really fascinating one, because teams are struggling with it. Some teams did regular Zoom calls after games, which are limited. But I tell you, I was at the Field of Dreams game, and I'll tell you, spending 2 hours in the press conferences was so much more illuminating on so many more levels than a season's worth of Zoom calls. Aaron Judge is really an interesting guy. I mean, his half-hour press conference was actually really endearing, talking about going to the ballpark and ever being in rural America, center America, although he grew up in sort of a rural part of California. And it was utterly charming. And yet, if you only had to listen to him through the Zoom calls and no access, around the batting cage, you would never know it. And that's a real shame.
Well,
and that's the tough part, is the Zooms are very sterile. You don't have a natural follow-up ability. You have to either raise your little hand on the Zoom, or you get back and put your name back in the chat. But it's also because there's so many people on there, and the way that it's structured, you can't ask the small nuanced questions either. Like, hey, like, how's the family? Like, I saw your dad's here today, or like, yeah, I just saw you guys got a dog. It's, those little conversations that you can have face to face that just, they're killed.
And most players like to talk about themselves. They'll be somewhat guarded, but if you're appreciative, and maybe that's not the right word, if you're interested, you will get that interest back at you usually.
Yeah.
Melanie, I can add in, you and I going through the minors, or you in the AFL, the building of trust that takes place over the course of months, where they get to know you, and they get to know you're not going to bury them, that you're telling their story, and that you're talking directly to their grandparents. Like, that's something that's totally lost in this.
It really is. And I will say, the one piece of fortune I've had in that, and just literally staring at a wall sometimes and trying to figure out how to work around this. I've ironically getting to know some of the agents, some of the parents that do have social media. There's a couple moms and dads that are active on social media. And then, of course, the wives, the girlfriends, the fiancés, working around that, and just trying to connect with them digitally to get that other end of it. I know this year we called up Spencer Watkins, and I'm usually held last in the question line on our Zooms, which means I don't usually get to ask the question I want. But my favorite every time we have a call up is, tell us a story. How did you find out? This is a 30th round kid who was getting ready to go coach at Paradise Valley High School and thought his career was done, and definitely thought with COVID that it was over. And his wife told him, like, let's do it one more time, like, find out. And so I finally got to ask, because no one else. I said, so how did you find out? And he broke down. I mean, he got really emotional, and he finally tells us all this, and tells us how close he was to quitting. And he never thought that he would be a big leaguer, even though he had like a sub-3 ERA almost his entire minor league career with Detroit. He was just a guy that slipped through. He wasn't a flashy prospect. And so once we told that, and of course they aired that clip, that was on our pregame show, that was what we talked about on radio. It was on our TV broadcast. I think his parents, more than anything, just were so appreciative of that connection and that chance. And that sticks with me.
Kevin, as we wrap up, any final thoughts from you?
Not really. I have one last thing. And where do you see yourself in 15 years, to sort of pick an arbitrary time period?
I like the 15 more than the 5. I think if anything, I've learned that 5 years is just, it goes by so quick.
Yeah.
I still can't believe that I really have been calling games now since 2009, and I don't even want to do the math on that. It's fine. Um, Honestly, in 15 years, it's up in the air. I have loved getting to work on the national end of things. I think there are some fabulous production crews out there, and I think their appreciation that I do bring something a little different and their desire to really dig that up and use that. Um, I will never not love that and respect that and understand how special it is that we're on the same page, because you don't get that everywhere you go. On the flip side, though, I do love being with a team on the day-to-day basis and being there for the grind of it and really getting to know the guys. And so ideally, and I say this now because most of my career I was told you have to choose between sidelines and play-by-play. You can't have both. You can't be both. Nobody does it. Well, now I get to do both. So, tell me again that people aren't wanting to mix this up and have broadcasters that can bring a little bit of everything. So that's my next focus is really in these next 15 years, having a role with a team on a day-to-day basis, but also having enough flexibility that there's pockets throughout the season that I actually do get to go and contribute on that national level as well, whether that is hosting or calling the games, whatever they see fit. I have absolutely loved getting to bounce back and forth and really just connect with as many fans of the game as possible. I just think it's such a cool time in this industry when we are realizing that, broadcasters can be just as flexible as your 5-tool player who's infield, outfield, all over the place.
It's all
Melanie.
storytelling on any level.
Melanie, not that you would, but you could go Jordan Hall of Fame speech in a couple of years and just settle every score.
Yeah, I think, a lot of people tell you, oh, well, what you've gone through, it makes you stronger. And, congratulations, like you're a woman and there aren't many. I'm not here. I'm here, first of all, because there were a lot of really good men and women who didn't let me quit, who were very insistent that I had something to give. But I'm also here in spite of a lot of men who chose to be absolutely horrible, who could have not only ended my career, but could have ended my desire to even still be here, if I'm being very frank. And so, yeah, I get a little satisfaction, a little bit of that Lady Gaga speech of, nothing makes me smile more than knowing that every time they walk into a deli and the TV is on, or if they walk into a store and they see the newspaper, they have to look at me and they have to be reminded of how they treated me and the fact that they are pretty much irrelevant right now. And the rest of us who are coming, who have paid these dues, and there are way more of women who have seen a lot more than I have. They're a new breed and they're not rolling over. And for the men too, there have been men who have, been treated wrong and who have gone through a lot. It doesn't make it right. I don't like, I think, glittering it with, oh, well, you're so much stronger for what you've been through. You're a badass, point blank, for choosing to survive and choosing to continue, and really being above everything else and just continuing to show up every day. Because sometimes that's the hardest part of it is just continuing to show up. But it is well worth it.
Is there anything else that you would like to say to broadcasters, male, female, etc., whether it's what you would never want to hear again, the important words that you feel should be addressed as we conclude?
Yeah, you just have to lean on each other. I know it's very easy in this industry to be hyper competitive and to see everybody else as your competition, as I manage my cough here. But without all of those people, you lose not only your chance to have friendships and to have people who understand what you're going through, because nobody else outside of our industry really ever understands what we're going through. But it's okay to root for each other, even if you're going out for the same job. I think people try to demonize everybody against each other, because they want to watch us push each other down. to where neither of us can get the job. We're so busy fighting each other that somebody else is kind of, cruising up the back road and getting it. And I think if I had taken that approach of just hyper competitiveness, I would have lost out on some really fortunate relationships and people who are, some of my best friends, and you can call them at any point and just connect. But they're also the people that remind you, like, this is not a glittering industry. And I think Jesse Agler had a really good point. The last winter meetings, God knows when we'll have another, but he said, when you get to the big leagues, whenever that is, just remember your life doesn't become perfect. Like, you still have problems. You still have human issues to deal with. I don't think he knew that I was going to get hired in a pandemic and I was, hey, there's more problems now than before. But it just all comes down to being able to not only accept what you can't change, but knowing that you've still got to work every day. You've still got to find, how do I improve? Where do I improve? What do I do to be better than I was the day before? Because now that you've got the job, you're responsible for keeping it. Nobody just hands it over to you on a silver platter and says, here's a 50-year deal. Yeah, congratulations. This is your off into the sunset moment. So when you commit to that, that's where things really start to find their way. And I haven't known how to respond to this. I've gotten a lot of emails, especially from men, and it's, I wasn't sure when they first hired you how this was going to be, or, I didn't really like your first call, but you've grown so much, and we can tell how much you've learned and how much you've developed your own game. And I appreciate that they see what I have worked so hard to do, because I knew that even though I had gotten the job, and Susan Waldman even said it, everybody wanted to put me on this pedestal of, oh, she's in the big, so she's a finished product, she's polished, whatever. And then being angry that I wasn't a finished product. And she said, that's just asinine. When I first started, I wasn't the level that I'm at right now. And she's like, and you're not at the level that you will be in 10 years. Everybody has to get better. I had never really been in a hyper professional situation where I could have a partner day in and day out who had a trained ear, who could tell me, this is how you get better, instead of just saying, oh, you've just got to get better. Putting it into words. I had been told by 2 different broadcast partners of, you're not connecting the action from by the time the pitch is delivered to when it's put in play. But no one would tell me how, until Jeff Arnold says, just say swing. He swings. That's how you connect it, from the pitch coming home to when it's put in play. And that little bit of advice that I'd searched for 4 years, I didn't get that until this year. And so it's just, there's so many, I know this is not a well strung together thought process for me at all right now, trying to explain this, but when you're willing to understand that you have to grow, you're not perfect. When you're willing to put in the hours, this is not the golden glittering job. And you're also willing to be a peer and a friend to everybody else who's also around you. That's how this keeps going. That's how you stay in it the next day. Because we know it's so easy to quit and to find a job that has, better hours and healthcare and, actually makes you feel like you have a life. But at the end of the day, we're called to do this. And if we can take advantage of all of those little things that tie together, that's when you really start cruising. And that's when you really start finding your why and perfecting it and making it bigger and growing that to where fans can enjoy it too.
Melanie, thank you very much.
No, thank you guys. Seriously, this has been absolutely amazing just to be able to sit down and tell some of these.
Yeah, we appreciate it. She's not been feeling well, as you could tell by the need for hydration here, and so I really appreciate that you've been powering through the not feeling well and joining us. We really appreciate it.
No, look, and I've missed it too. I think we all know, as broadcasters, we do love to talk a little bit. So it has not been in my nature to have laid in bed for the past week. And you get to those days, you're like, all right, let's do things. Let's get back to life. So I've just got a nagging cough right now, but we'll eventually just beat that into submission too. It's fine.
Melanie Newman, the Ballpark Digest 2021 Major League Baseball Broadcaster of the Year. Kevin Reichard, would you like to sew things up?
Again, thank you, Mel. I really appreciate it. And if you've been listening to our other podcast fans, more awards are on the way, but this is a big one for us this year. So thank you.
For Melanie and Kevin Reichard, I'm Jesse Goldberg Strassler. This is Ballpark Digest.